Hello, welcome to Lawrence County History Corner. This week we are going for part 3 of the 1914 Massie murders. We've been talking about Harley Beard, which was the man who was accused of murdering the Massie family. And it, as far as that's concerned, pretty much an open and shut case because he did admit to the murders. Last time I talked about his family. What we do know about his childhood, by the time he was 13 years old, he was no longer living in the home with his parents, and he was, according to him, doing chores for his keep. That was an occupation he started when he was 13 years old. Now, he lost his mother at a young age prior to 1906, and then another tragedy would hit him around 1908. The stories vary. There's actually two versions. According to Harley himself, he fell from a tree and hit his head. This strike was not a minor injury. In fact, he was later quoted saying, "Sometimes the place hurts me yet." The head injury would cause him a lot of issues, and it actually was brought up by people who tried to get him pardoned, and then also to excuse his actions. Other accounts say he didn't fall from the tree, but he in fact was struck by a falling limb. But either way, he did suffer a major blow to his head that resulted in quite a bit of issues. By 1910, he was, in fact, an orphan. His father died on the 12th of July, 1910, in Clear Creek Township, Warren County, Ohio. He was buried in Wood Hill Cemetery in Franklin, Warren County, Ohio. And then, at that time, Harley truly became an orphan. But he had already been outside of the house working, doing chores, and working as a farm laborer in various locations. Now his family, he had again 8 siblings, and of those siblings, many of them moved into there's a few of them that moved into this area. So he did have a reason to come to this area. Around 1913, he moved from his home in Chicago, where he had been living with family, to Lawrence County. He began working for the Massies, Robert, Nancy, and Mary, in September 1913. Now, according to Harley himself, Bob treated him roughly. But the 100 witnesses said that was absolutely false. By this time, Harley was 18 years old. He was considered a good farmhand. He was noted to, though, be afraid of what he called lonesome places. He seldom went out after dark and kind of had a fear of the dark. Some people said he had a deep-set, shifty gaze, and that he was known for asking funny questions. It was interesting that most of them didn't say what the questions were. It was unusual questions that he would come up with. Another curious and topic that came up after the murders was that he liked to read. Specifically, Harley liked to read history books. They said he had a passion for rape and murder stories, and he specifically focused on the Spanish Inquisition. Pay attention, because that comes back into the story later. At the time, these books were referred to as red history. He spent most of his nights reading the books. Although he had this love of reading, it never kept him from his job, but that didn't stop his employers from making comments or complaining. Nancy, a very religious woman, often told him, "You ought to read more of the Bible and less about such terrible things." When it comes to the Massies, well, I mentioned that he had siblings nearby. Sam Davis, who later was the one who identified the razor that was used to kill both Mary and Nancy, was married to either Harley's sister or aunt. I cannot find a record of him marrying her sister, so it must be an aunt. But he was a relative of Harley's, and Harley had been visiting him when Sam noticed his razor was missing. Harley, of course, denied the missing razor, but it was later identified at the crime scene. Harley was rumored to have often argued with Bob, but other people said that the Masseys treated him like a member of the family. When it came to the Massey finances, he was probably well versed in how much money they had, because they often discussed it at the table, a dining room table over meals. It was pretty common for them to discuss it, and that may have instigated the attack that eventually led to their deaths. After the murders, Harley stole one of the horses and took a horse and buggy to Gallipolis. From Gallipolis, he traveled to Chicago to live with his sister. When he was questioned about what happened, it was ironic. The police noted that they asked him if he had driven the horse hard from the murder scene to Gallipolis, so which he said absolutely not. He would not ever drive the horse that far. That would have been cruel. Of course, the police noticed that was an odd statement from a man who had just murdered 3 people to be worried about the conditions of a horse. Rumors began abounding about that time. They claimed that he was an escaped lunatic, that he was a foreigner by birth, or he had been committed to asylum for years. Now, we do know he was in an orphan's asylum as a young child, so it's possible they are connecting a mental hospital and confusing that with an orphan asylum. When people got to the farm, they saw Harley's blood-stained overalls and a shirt in a room on the floor. His best suit was missing. The suit itself had been bought by Robert Massey himself just a few days before the murders, and Harley had topped out his new outfit with new shoes. Afterwards, he was found at his sister's home in Chicago, and ironically, when he was found, he claimed that his last name was Day to match his sister. He refused at first to acknowledge who he was. It didn't take long, though, for the police to convince him, and he admitted that he was in fact Harley Beard. According to the police, he showed no remorse for what he had done, and he was taken into custody. Now, I am running out of time, so we're going to go to another part 4 of the 1914 Massey murders. This is about the execution itself. I hope you enjoyed this version, and I will see you next time.